Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We'll wait about 30 seconds before we get started, but thanks for hopping on. Hope everyone is doing well. A lot of familiar faces on, so appreciate that you guys keep on coming back just to hear me speak at you for like half an hour. So appreciate you guys being here. We need to do like polls on this at the beginning, like, oh, how was your quarter end, or how's the weather, or something like that. We need to personalize it somehow at the beginning of these. Well, it's 2 after, so I'll get started here. Hope everyone had a great or productive or easy quarter end. I'm not sure that that describes quarter end at all, but hopefully you guys got through it. The day came anyways for all quarterlies to be submitted. So that day always comes, but hopefully it was all right for you all. At least it wasn't year end. So we already got to that one this year. But today we'll talk about, there was a recent release on Monday in Finlee. So we'll talk about where to find the release notes, what was released. We'll talk about that in detail. And then around this time, it's really hard for me not to talk about recommendations at quarter end and cleanup items that I recommend that each team has, or like has a checklist to go through on a quarterly basis after quarter end payments have cleared and all your quarter end processing is done. I think I spoke about it in February, the last time we officially met as well, but we'll talk about it again. Always a great reminder during this time of year. And then as always, we'll have time for a Q&A section here at any point. If you have questions related to what I'm talking about or anything else related to Finlee, go ahead and put that in the chat or the Q&A. I'm not sure anyone has ever used the Q&A, so I'm curious to see it. Maybe if someone wants to submit something through Q&A or chat, either of those work. So I'm going to hop over to Finlee first, but then we'll come back to this slide when we're doing recommendations at quarter end, but I'm going to hop in to Finlee so that everyone can see that, right? Finlee. Okay, perfect. So as always, when we have a release, we do send an email to review the release notes, and that is visible in the Finlee documentation in the Help and Support Center in Finlee. So when I go to Help and Support, there's going to be a link to Finlee documentation. And then under Finlee documentation, the what's new is going to have the latest version at the top with the corresponding release notes. So we will go over the release here. As I may discuss a little bit later, we have some cool things in development. Like I talked about last time, our next priority is going to be the Kanban board. We're still working on some optimizations with that. That was not included in this release. It's likely not going to be included in a release next month, but probably the following there. But we are working on that still because I know some of you that are on here are really looking forward to that. We're absolutely making some optimizations to the Kanban board, like download the columns, being able to rename them, potentially adding columns, things like that. For the organization of the Kanban board. Not included in this release, but that is still upcoming there, so watch out for that. So there are a few enhancements, some changes, and one bug fix that we released here on Monday morning. One that maybe you were all not aware of, or maybe the impact isn't big day to day, but I thought was important to add into Finlee is this first enhancement here of bank imports now support resolving warnings directly during the import process. Activity log warnings now behave consistently with ledger file warnings. So ledger file transactions have obviously required fields like company, amount, bank account, transaction date. If any of the files that you're importing on the ledger don't have one of those fields or multiple, then you're allowed to add and resolve that transaction to add to the ledger. We've moved that functionality over now to bank file imports. Previously, you would just have a warning, an error that there was something wrong with the bank file and that you would have to adjust it and re-upload that, particularly when you're using the generic bank. Like if you don't have a bank account ID correct, it would give an error on import. Now it allows you to resolve that warning and actually post that bank statement transaction. I'll give a quick example of that, like within Finlee. I'm going to drag and drop a generic bank import here and import that in. It's going to give a warning, just like the warning that you're going to get on ledger files. And just like ledger files, you're going to go to the activity log select the warning and error link, and then under action, you're able to populate the information that was missing. So in this one, I didn't have the account ID present on the generic bank import. So now I'm able to select that account, save it, and then it's going to add that transaction to the bank transaction and move it over to the manage exceptions to resolve that item there under manage exceptions. So if you've ever previously had an issue with especially a generic bank or any other bank file missing critical information, which on the bank transaction is the required fields are transaction date, amount, and bank account. So if any of those three or multiple of those three data sets are missing, then you're able to now resolve those just like you resolve ledger files there. So especially if you have to commonly fill out a generic bank template and import that in for some reason. Maybe you have like a sweep account or investment account that's not reconciled, or you can't pull a bank file from that, then that will be useful in that use case there. So that was the first enhancement that we released. We did add a new field to ledger transactions. So a new notes field has been added to ledger transactions, allowing users to record additional information beyond the details field. The notes field is available in the search ledger. So beyond details, we thought that it was important to be able to add additional notes to ledger transactions. This is not going to be present on the UI of the search ledger, but when I click into a transaction, I now have this notes field. That's not a required field, but it's a place that you can put additional notes beyond the details. So the details coming over from your ledger files, if it's pulling like the details from an ACH file or the employee name of a check that was issued, things like that. If you wanted to put notes beyond just the details there, we have a whole new section called notes to put additional notes on that transaction there on those ledger transactions in search ledger. When you fill that out, I always just put test on that, go ahead and hit update. And then that will always be in the notes section of that transaction. So if you have additional notes during research, if you have something you need to void and you want to put a reason for that void and not have that obscure the details section, then we created that new field of notes just so you had an extra place to put additional notes on that transaction, on ledger transactions on the search ledger there. We did a good amount of things on the back end to help optimize imports, and we have a few more updates coming in the next couple of releases that will allow us to accommodate larger and faster importing. So the liability data structure has been optimized to improve performance and support faster, larger imports. You will not see any impact on the UI. I did want to include this as an enhancement because it's going to be kind of tied to future releases here, but we optimize how we structure your liability data that you import into Finlee so that down the road, as you guys grow, as your liability analysis or variance reports grow, then we're going to be able to accommodate larger imports, which will actually release pretty shortly here. We just had to restructure first before doing that. So that's what we did in this release. So a large portion of that was on the back end, but great for optimizations down the road. Two changes that we made here that could directly impact you all, at least the first one. MFA tokens are now valid for 24 hours. So when you log in initially to Finlee and you put in your MFA code or you approve on the Duo app, that allows that token to be active for 24 hours. So during a day period there. So if you log in multiple times, it should go directly into Finlee within that 24-hour period so that you don't have to log in or get logged out multiple times. It depends on your browser. If you completely restart your computer, go back in, it's likely that you're going to have to put your MFA token back in, but we have refined the timeline for MFA tokens to be valid within Finlee so that you're not getting kicked out as often. The kick out, of inactivity is still active and usually about 30 minutes on each tenant. So that's a little bit different. If you get kicked out, you are going to have to be logged back in, but the MFA token has been adjusted there. There was a change that was required. Earlier in the year, we had a release of the search bank versus search ledger. So what was formerly known as the ledger date is now posted
date. So posted date for both ledger and bank transactions are the day that it was posted into Finlee or imported into Finlee. On reports, we still had, under reports, I did not change the label of the as of date to the new vernacular of posted date. It was showed as ledger date prior, so we updated that to posted date to be consistent with the new vernacular there. So that has changed. That is still the same as what you formerly knew as ledger date. Posted date again is the day that it's posted. So when I'm running a report that says an as of date of a posted date today, that means everything imported through today, regardless of transaction date there. Maybe I'll review dates again really quickly because that's always a good thing to review, but I wanted to go over that we made a slight change on the report. So if you notice something different on the report customization as of date, which was formerly known as ledger date, it's now posted date. And then a few instances over the last quarter or so, maybe none of you were impacted by this, but there was a bug fix in rare instances when you were importing. The import got the lock screen of when the import is happening, got stuck and it wasn't allowing you to move forward on bank reconciliation. Only a handful of instances happened, but development was able to identify the issue in those instances, and then we resolved that in this release so that the stuck auto match was not happening moving forward, where it didn't allow you to move forward in bank reconciliation. So most of you probably never encountered that, and there was only a handful of instances of that, but we wanted to be sure to resolve that in the next release once we identified the issue there. So that is everything that was included in this release. Hopefully you find some usable instances there. And just like I said, keep on looking for notifications of releases and then look at the corresponding release notes on Finlee documentation. We are always constantly around the clock working on bug fixes, optimizations. Next priority is Kanban board. That's been a big request of everyone's there, but we're always taking customer suggestions, and we have a lot of cool things coming in the future. So definitely look out for that. And these webinars will always go over those changes as well. Just a review of those dates really quickly, and then I'll hop into our recommendations at quarter end. You all may know these dates already, but just since I kind of talked about it a little bit with the posted date, I want to talk about these different dates here that are present on ledger transactions just as a good review. Cleared date are cleared ledger transactions during bank reconciliation. That corresponds to the statement date. So most of you today probably did your reconciliation of the 12th, closing out the statement of 5/12. So all of those transactions that were cleared during bank reconciliation are going to have a clear date of 5/12 on them. The last change refers to any ledger transaction that has been changed within that date range. So any type of change is, obviously first when a ledger transaction is added, that posts a change date. If you guys modify the customer on a ledger transaction, the amount, details, add notes, any change to those ledger transaction updates the last change date. So you can see, like, let's say that yesterday you avoided a bunch of ledger transactions and you wanted to see anything that changed within the last day, you could absolutely put a last change date of yesterday, put void status, voids only, and look at everything that was voided yesterday because the last action on that ledger transaction was yesterday. Posted date corresponds to the date that ledger transaction was imported or added into Finlee there. So you did a reconciliation of the 12th yesterday. So you imported all the activity that happened yesterday. All of the imports that you did, the ledger imports, have a posted date of 5/13 on them because that's the day that you posted them into Finlee. If you guys use Positive Pay, the module, which is a step in bank reconciliation, that would be called Positive Pay, Manage Positive Pay here. Not all of you have it. It's not incredibly common, but tenants do have it. When you generate a Positive Pay file, that is going to post a Positive Pay file date. So on those transactions that were included in that Positive Pay file, that is going to have that Positive Pay file date. And then transaction date is the most common date of ledger transactions that you see. That's the date that you see here on the UI. And transaction date corresponds to the date that we expected to clear the bank. So on tax payments, that's usually due date. If there's some additional logic that we put, like it's always clearing the day after you submit it. We may have modified that slightly during the implementation process, but the date here on the UI is always corresponding to transaction date, which should correspond to the date that we expect it to clear. So a lot of the times transaction date and clear date are like match, but they're not always matching because it's super common for tax payments to clear early and pounds to clear a little bit late or early, depending on the date that you expect it to settle versus the date that it actually does. So excuse me, if you're looking for the date that it actually cleared, that should correspond to clear date, and transaction date is the original date that we expected it to clear there. So that's just a quick overview of the dates. Didn't plan on doing that, but since I touched it today, I thought it'd be a good idea to review that. So moving back over to our recommendations at quarter end, I'll look really quickly to see if there's any questions or comments on anything that I talked about. No, there isn't. Okay. So we'll move over then to recommendations at quarter end cleanup. If you guys have been on this webinar, you'll definitely have heard these before, probably many times. But again, it's just a great time for a reminder to compare like what your internal processes are at the cleanup of quarter end versus what our recommendations are. If there's something you're not doing, consider doing it. We do recommend doing all of the following. So quarter end cleanup, the first thing that I would always do after you know that you've paid all of your quarterly taxes and that they cleared, that may take a few days after the end of the month, after the 30th there, but our recommendation is to review all outstanding ledger transactions. Yes, this includes anything that's not a check, of course, that would come up as an aged uncleared item. So if you guys make federal payments via EFTPS, if you make ACH credit, ACH debit, manually make payments online, especially that last category, you want to make sure that those have all cleared timely, especially at quarter end. Beyond the 30th, things shouldn't be clearing too much later if they're a non-check. So you want to make sure that those have all been made timely, especially the ones that are marked as manually paid and you have to go online and make those payments. So reviewing outstanding ledger transactions is incredibly important at this time of year. And then there's an asterisk on it because I always recommend every single quarter to look at outstanding tax checks. Now, you don't necessarily need to look at the outstanding tax checks that were due on 4/30. It's been a week and a half since the close of the quarter when those were due. So it's completely possible that there's some tax checks that have not cleared, but anything prior to last month, if there's still tax checks outstanding, I definitely recommend reviewing that. If you're not on the tax team, maybe send them that list of tax checks to go back to the agency. It does take some time for checks to clear, but more than a quarter. I think it's probably the responsibility of the tax team or anyone else at your service bureau to reach out to that agency if they haven't received it. It's really common that you have like a void after 30, 60, 90 days on the check. And even if they have it sitting on their desk, it may not even be valid to deposit. So it's really important to void, reissue, or communicate to that agency that you had sent a check there and call them or, reach out to them. So we have since the last quarter, and we already talked about this in our last webinar, but we do have a new outstanding checks report, which allows you to have a PDF version of all outstanding checks by customer there. So maybe this is a good time if you want to customize. It's great for the achievement process, but in the context of quarter end, maybe looking at your tax account as of maybe March 31st, looking at all outstanding checks as of that time. I have an outstanding check for IRS. This doesn't even kind of logically make sense. You don't send checks to IRS typically. But again, this is an example tenant here. But maybe this is a good time to report either to the customer or go back to the agency to review why that check has not cleared if you've actually sent out that check. That's an important part of this process, and checks inherently, although we're talking about changing that down the road, But checks right now do not report under aged uncleared items when a check number is present because it can take a while to clear. So especially related, if you guys have OBC and you guys are doing the treatment process, then great, you're already capturing checks that are aged at least by 6 months. But on the tax side, after the close of quarter end, reviewing the prior quarter open checks or any checks prior to the last quarter is really important to reach out to that agency and try to get that payment made there. The next item here is to run customer balance summary for non-tax accounts. Again, since the last time that we talked about quarter end, we have released the new type of positive balance. So if you guys have opted into positive balance, any non-tax ledger that we've opted into reporting a subledger rec type of positive balance will report to you anytime that the customer is more than zero on that non-tax ledger there. So it's possible that you are getting these automatically reported in subledger reconciliation. But if you aren't, even if you are, it's not bad at some frequency to run the customer balance summary for non-tax accounts to look at the overall balance that you're holding for non-tax accounts. This is not the case for every single bank account that's not taxed, but typically what I say as a generic statement is that any non-tax ledger, and it just my test data doesn't show this very well, but any non-tax ledger should be maintaining a $0 balance at all times. So unless, there's workers' comp, there's other benefits accounts, your billing account, unless you move money out constantly has money in it. But like your direct deposit, trust, things like that should be a simple in and out. So those should be maintaining a $0 balance, not only not a negative balance, but a positive balance as well. So it's not bad to run a customer balance summary for your non-tax accounts to look at your overall balances per customer. If you guys have any interest in learning more about positive balance, I think we have our previous webinar posted, but of course you can reach out to us if you think that you should opt in for positive balancing and subledger reconciliation there. Reviewing all non-customer ledgers on a quarterly basis is great as well. If you have especially customers marked as internal where we don't report on subledger reconciliation, it's not bad to review all non-customer ledgers. What I mean by non-customer ledger, so with client funds reconciliation, we always assume that
Hello.
am I back? I
Yes,
was on
I
hold
can
there
hear you
for a
now.
second.
Yes,
Okay.
you're back.
All right, I am back. Sorry about that. My internet has been slow all morning, so it's great timing. It's not slow any other day of the week, but on this one, it's slow today. So sorry about that. So where I was at, all client funds accounts that you're reconciling within Finlee, there's a baseline assumption that all the funds in that account are related to customers that you're holding funds on behalf of there. There's some funds that potentially aren't related to customers there. Like let's say that in a returns account, you guys pre-funded it by $25,000 so that it never goes into zero. That $25,000 is technically the Service Bureau's money and not related to a customer. There's sometimes sweep transactions in and out that record like net what you've sent over or moved over to a separate account. So there's this level of customers that are not technically customers of yours that have money recorded on the ledger so that you record anything that isn't customer related in those accounts. Now, I'm saying that you should review all of those non-customer ledgers because there should be some justification for you holding funds that aren't related to customers in these client fund accounts there. So I think it's really good to review those just to make sure that there's not some non-customer ledger that's just a bucket for unknown things. It's totally fine to have them temporarily there, but you should be commonly clearing those out and making sure that those are zero Or if you're holding money in a non-customer ledger, you should have some justification of why you're holding that money. The variance, like let's say, and it's a great time to review this. Let's say that you have a customer ledger called unknown variance, something like that. You have a transaction hit your bank account that you're not sure who it's related to. Perfectly fine to record those transactions so that you can move forward on bank reconciliation and subledger reconciliation. But at some frequency, you need to clear that out or talk to the appropriate department to help clear that out. So especially at this time of year, you're going to have tax payments that you're not exactly sure what customer it's related to or what agency. So you weren't able to identify where to assign it or what to match it to. Make sure you get with your tax team again, reiterate that to them or go to them with the entire list as soon as possible so that you can put that on an individual customer so that you know that you don't have this non-customer ledger that's holding this element of unknown that's not actively being worked on that is actually related to a customer where they either owe you funds or you owe funds back to them. We don't want to create a non-customer ledger that's hiding balances without justification of like why there's a balance on that customer or you actively working towards resolving that customer balance there. So it's our recommendation to really frequently, but especially at this time as you're cleaning up from quarter end, review all non-customer ledgers. When I refer to internal ledgers, I've talked about it a good amount on webinars, but there are some organizations that under or service bureaus that have under organization customers listed as internal. When they're listed as internal, that means that we aren't reporting them on subledger reconciliation, regardless if they have a variance or not. You can also see if they're internal, excuse me, on the customer list here, and they'll be marked as internal. So if you need a refresher on which ones are marked as internal, good idea to, excuse me, good idea to frequently review those. My throat is not working with me today. Sorry about that. So the last item, I believe, is that last item that we recommend at quarter end cleanup is to review outstanding liabilities. So on a daily basis, you import your pending liabilities into Finlee. And depending on if you balance by tax code or not, we sum by customer, by tax code, or just by customer, and compare that to your ledger. We're looking at the total of sum amounts to compare to your ledger. That's not taking into account the it is in a lot of ways, but it's not taking into account if there's old outstanding liabilities in that liability report. So it's always my recommendation, and I say this every single quarter, to look at your liability analysis or liability variance report that you're pulling out of your tax processing system and to look at if there's anything pending from prior quarters. Sometimes there is something pending, like an applied for customer or a tax code with a customer. That's a valid pending liability from a prior quarter. Sometimes you're in the middle of amendments, so that's definitely valid there. But it's really important to make sure that there's not consistently unpaid liabilities that are aged or old that shouldn't be there. So it is possible. And with your tax processing team, I'm sure they have things to prevent this, but it's possible to potentially miss payments. They're outstanding as far as liabilities, and then we have the money on the ledger, right? So if we have the money on the ledger and it's still showing as outstanding, then that's in balance technically because you are holding the money for something that's pending. So it's really important at some frequency. I would recommend at least on a quarterly basis to look at your outstanding liabilities and to look at anything that's prior to current period that's still outstanding. And just like your non-customer ledgers that are holding balances, there should be some justification from your tax team or whoever's responsibility is to track those to why those are still pending. Because if they're for prior periods, unless there's amendment, which is there is an element of, hey, we know that this is late or we need to adjust something that we previously filed. We want to make sure that we're not making tax payments late and they're not just sitting out there and you're not just holding the money for something that should be paid. So we recommend doing that frequently there. So that is really it for today. What I wanted to review, thought it was a great time to review those 4 recommendations at quarter end. Hopefully that is something that is helpful to you all. If you're doing all of those, then that's great. That's our recommendation every single quarter. But if there's something that you're not currently looking at, hopefully that prompts you to look at that, just to tie up quarter end there in Finley. So as always, we take recommendations of what you guys would like to see in this webinar very seriously. As always, you guys can put development requests in, or especially since you guys just went through quarter end, if there's some struggle that you guys had at quarter end through reconciliation, bank reconciliation in particular, that you think could be optimized, feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to meet with you to make sure that we help you as much as possible. I know that there's some element of manual work at quarter end, especially when things clear for different amounts or in bulk payments when not expected. But if you want to talk about your options, feel free to reach out to us at support@rickdigital.com. So we appreciate your guys' time today. We'll hang around for a few minutes just to see if anyone else has any questions or suggestions for us. And then Dylan in the chat put in our previous webinar, which was a product review, because we had a big release in February. So feel free to go and look at that link if you weren't able to catch that. That talks particularly about positive balances there. So thanks so much for your time today. It was nice to see you all, and hope you'll join us for the next one. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Autumn. Nice to see you. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Dwight. We'll hang around just for a second here. Thanks, Kathy. Nice to see you. All right, we'll go ahead and end it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Thanks.